Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel discussion titled The Psychology of Cyber Trust, Leadership Strategies for Building Resilient Societies. Moderated by Riz Khan, international journalist and TV host, Al Arabiya English. Our panelists are Professor Mary Aiken, Chair of the Department of Cyber Psychology, Capital Technology University, Odhran McCarthy, United Nations Inter-Regional Crime and Justice Research Institute.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As always, it's my honor to be your host for this session, which is entitled The Psychology of Cyber Trust, Leadership Strategies for Building Resilient Societies. Now, a quick question here. How many of you are familiar with the term cyber psychology? Any hands up for being familiar with it? And that's because you came last year, I'm sure. That's good to know, because I certainly wasn't familiar with it until I had the honor of interviewing Professor Mary Aiken, our guest at last year's GCF, where we talked about the importance of the field. And it makes sense when you think about it as people become more and more involved in cyberspace, in everything from sort of government-related transactions to interpersonal relationships. Their minds are being shaped by that cyber experience, and that can have a major effect on mental health, on how people perceive the cyber environment. And what's even more notable, I guess, is that we're constantly bombarded with news of cyber threats, both at a national level, the grey warfare that we hear about that takes down essential government services or even private sector services, to banking and personal data breaches. So we need to sort of figure out, is such an evolving and growing environment one where we have to strengthen our trust? Now, according to a survey by the Oxford Institute that looked at 81 countries, there was evidence of manipulation campaigns, while misinformation became a common strategy in 93% of those countries, 81 countries. As you can imagine, that's quite a lot. What it means is that trust in cyberspace is now more fragile than ever. So this is looking at how we can rebuild that strength and trust online, particularly by approaching psychological expertise and building a confidence in how crime and justice works when it comes to cyberspace in order to boost the psychological security of the public. Now, of course, you see our excellent panel. The expertise we have is something I want to try and tap into for the next 25 or 30 minutes. I'm going to start with a question for Professor Mary Aiken, just for those who aren't familiar with it, to ask, Professor, if you had a one-line explanation for what cyber psychology is, what it covers and what you've learned from it as a person, what would you say?
Okay, well, first of all, salam alaikum, marhaba bikum fi GCF, yom al-tani. Cyber psychology is the study of the impact of technology on human behavior. It's an advanced discipline within applied psychology. It's relatively young as a discipline. It's about 2 years old. And it's the study of as I say, the impact of technology on humans. My specialist area is forensic cyber psychology, which is the study of criminal, abnormal, and problematic behavior online. And unfortunately, I'm kept pretty busy.
We're going to touch on that as we go through this session. Odhran, great to see you as well. And I want to ask you, where does the work of your organization fit in when it comes to giving the public a sense that the online space is one that has to be engaged and that there are efforts to manage crime and justice within that space?
Great. Thank you, and pleasure to be here on the panel. When you asked the question, if I can, just who's heard the concept of cyber psychology? If I was in the audience, I would have raised my hand as one of those who didn't. Which is interesting, though, because a lot of what we do in my organization, Unicre, really touches upon cyber psychology indirectly, even if we don't use that concept. Everything we do in my organization on innovation, technology, cybercrime, online harms in general, it's always framed for us as not exclusively a technical issue. It's really a human issue. It's something that challenges the human systems we have. So what we've always done from our side is to try to have that human-centered, victim-centered kind of approach to things, which fundamentally, I guess, when we break it down, really is that element of understanding the psychology of the cyberspace. So again, as I said, even if we don't really use that term, it's something that resonates very much with us. So I'm delighted to be here. You know, and just a few moments ago, we actually released a report, Clicks and Links and Tricks, oh my, how serious organized crime exploits digital trust pathways. And again, that's another very, very good example, I think, because that's a report that looks at the technical exploitation of web architecture, the infrastructure of the internet, and it takes that technical topic and it looks at from this trust perspective, this human element. So
that's what we want to see, is the human element side, or discover that. Now, you know, we're discovering at this forum that the problem of cybercrime and cyber fraud is growing like crazy. And a global stat that I discovered is that international scammers steal over 1 trillion in 12 months. And that happened in the Global State of Scams report in 2024. 1 trillion, over 1 trillion. So I'm going to ask Professor Aiken to give us something at a more sort of local level, because I know you have some information on that.
Yes, so what we're seeing is a global surge in cyber fraud, and cyber fraud is a subset of cybercrime. And specifically, you know, the global stats are over 1 trillion lost to cyber scammers and cyber attackers. And specifically here, this is, as I say, a global issue here in Saudi. What we see is that over 90% of people surveyed in a recent survey are concerned about being targeted in a cyber scam or a cyber fraud attempt. And that over, I believe it's 54% have actually been the victim of a cyber scam. Now, why is it so prevalent? Why is it increasing? And why are so many of the population under attack, if you will? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, these fraud attempts and scams are being spread through social media, which is giving them incredible reach. Secondly, cybercriminals are deploying AI in terms of targeting individuals. And the AI that they're deploying is trained in a psychological or cyber psychological context. And it's trained to attack human vulnerability. So first of all, it's creating a profile of the victim. And secondly, it's targeting that weak spot or a weak point in terms of the victim. And those weak points tend to be around what we describe in psychology as cognitive vulnerabilities or vulnerabilities in decision making, and effectively cognitive biases as well. So what does that mean? It means that if you get a text from your bank manager and the bank manager is instructing that you log in with your credentials and, you know, verify your account, effectively that's leveraging a psychological attack vector, which is authority bias. So the propensity of people to think, this is my bank manager, this is somebody from the government, this is somebody from social services asking me to do something, and therefore I should do it. And that's, you know, that's a vulnerability. And what that does is when people are under attack, it erodes trust in cyber contexts. And that's not just about losing money, that's about loss of trust. So where does the problem lie? The problem lies in the fact that trust is a real-world construct. I know you, I trust you. I use my senses. How do you look? How do you sound? How do you smell? How do you move? And from those things, I decide, are you a trustworthy person or not? Those skills come from a very old piece of technology that's about 1 million years in development, which is the human brain. And the problem is those senses that we've developed over that very, very long period of time do not serve us well online. And therefore, it's very easy to fall victim. So how can we counter this? How can we counter these attack vectors? And if you think of them, think of being targeted with something as sophisticated as ChatGPT, pointing at you as an individual. You might be young, you might be a teenager, you might be a young adult, you might be senior, you might be digitally literate or not, and you've got to withstand that. And my advice is what I describe as the trust paradox.
Can we get onto the solutions in a second?
Well, there's one thing just about the trust paradox is the trust paradox says, don't trust anything online, always verify. Right. So it's a paradox is zero trust, always verify, actually builds trust.
Thank you, because I want to get on, Professor Aiken, to what the strategies could be in just a moment. But for Dr. McCarthy here, I do want to touch on this. The growth of AI is exponential. It's actually, a year ago, we would have been talking about something probably quite different. How has that, the arrival of, or not the arrival, the acceleration of AI's influence affected the work you do?
You know, I think with AI, I mean, my organization, a lot of the work we're doing in terms of AI is really in terms of how we can leverage for positive potential. We do a lot of work with the law enforcement community in terms of leveraging it. But again, what we're seeing also in the malicious side of it is, you know, cybercrime is already extensively leveraging this. The report that I mentioned a few moments ago, Clicks and Links and Tricks, the report we've just released, digs into a lot of the, I would say, steps back a little bit from the, you know, the emerging new technologies and looks at some of the traditional fundamental classic elements. But of course, in the report, we have to touch upon this because AI, blockchain, all this new innovation is exponentially charging all of the traditional challenges we've been facing. Again, Professor Aiken has mentioned, you know, the importance of trust being the foundation of it. In our report, we really dig into this element of, you know, people just, they receive a link. It comes from a trusted source. It comes from a familiar source. It's in a group chat. There's that automatic trust where we dive into it, we click, we go. So that the challenges of trust are being also affronted in many ways, are challenged by automation, because the criminal elements are definitely leveraging the automation in the processes as well.
Right. We'll touch on that in a bit more in this. I do want to mention a quote I got from you, Professor Aiken. I love this line: "Trust is the currency of the digital age." And this is why you talk about, you know, the verification and the trust paradox issue. Tell me what you think might be, as we expand on this idea of that, what might be the ideal way to engage people to understand the risk? How do you get into the minds of people to make them realize this is something they have to really get into and understand if they want to stay safe online?
Yes, and as Aaron just said, that, you know, we do a lot of work around don't click on a link. I'm sure everybody in the room has heard that. The problem with that from a psychological perspective is it becomes what we describe as the wallpaper effect. You don't even recognize the wallpaper anymore because it's always there. And I think instead of telling people don't click on a link, I think what we have to do is we have to empower citizens here and globally in terms of how they can actually counter these attacks. And the advice that I give is you need to begin to think like a cyber behavioral profiler. That's what I do. I work as an advisor to Interpol. I work as an advisor to Europol in the area of cyber behavioral profiling in terms of criminality. And what I teach people to do, and citizens in general, and we've done a number of micro media campaigns, you know, small ads that go out on social media, teaching people to think like a profiler. So what does that mean? It means that when you get an incoming text, instead of just don't click, you need to forensically examine each aspect, each word, each sentence, and try and break down if this is an attack or not. So for example, if you see the word urgent in the text, that's tapping into what's called the urgency heuristic. So that's trying to make you think you have to do it now. The layer on that might be that you get that text at 5:15, and the text will say, your account has been, or suspicious transactions on your account at 5 o'clock, and this message comes out at 5:15, and it says urgent. You then fall into the trap of the sort of just-in-time principle, where you think this has just happened, and if I act now, I can save all the money in my account. That's a trap. So you have to look at every word, you have to look at personalization, you have to look at authority bias. Even if you examine the URL, so the link, and you're told to look carefully at the link, but the message might say account compromise. And then when you look at the link, it might say account compromise, portal remedy, or something like that.
They can spoof it, yeah. They can spoof
but
it.
you've looked at the link,
Yeah.
and you think, oh, this is the account compromise
Right.
portal, and therefore you try and act on that. But that's another trick. So what we say is 3 words to counter these attack vectors: stop, think, check. Stop, don't react to urgent. Think, use your critical thinking to examine every aspect and see, are you being gamed here? And check, always verify, zero trust.
It's really worrying, actually, when you see the evolution of scams. I mean, it was very obvious when I used to get emails that said, we have sent you this massage, and you can see it's not even, it's not even proper English. And then sometimes the voice messages where they said, this is the tax authority, you are in default of your payment. If you don't pay up immediately, the cops will come and get you. I don't know how many official organizations call them the cops. So it has evolved. What have you found to be the greatest, or not the greatest, the kind of the most worrying evolution in dealing with crime and you know, in the work you do, Dr. McCarthy?
If I may, can I
please,
slightly build upon there, just what was mentioned? Just to say, I fully agree with what you've said, this understanding of the psychology being absolutely essential. I think a lot of traditionally of what we have done in the past has been awareness raising around there are harms, there are risks in the space, which helps people to perhaps identify it, but doesn't really help them to understand it. And I think what we have to do going forward is have that understanding, you know, awareness raising around how manipulation works, how exploitation works, how when they weave these narratives online, they weave in these hooks into emotions, all that aspect of it. I think we have to factor that into our understanding when we talk about awareness raising, and not just tell people how to identify the risks, but why they're identifying it and how to build resilience around it.
And I think that's really important, if I may, around citizen empowerment. Because the problem with cyber fraud, people think, oh, you know, the police can protect me, or the bank will give me the money back. That is not the case. The point about it is the volume. These attacks have the characteristics of big data: volume, velocity, and variety. What does that mean? There's a lot of it. And therefore, the only way that we can really effectively counter this is through citizen empowerment and giving people the tools to actually fight back.
And you're saying, Professor Aiken, that when citizens know that there are safeguards in place, their trust builds, and you can build on that.
Yes, but you can also get compliance and, you know, over-compliance, and you can get a phenomenon in psychology which we call learned helplessness. So when people believe that it's impossible, there are scams everywhere, they can become sort of resigned and hope that somebody else will help them out. Hope that if they lose their money, the bank will give it back to them. Hope that the police will find the perpetrator and track them down, and somehow they'll get their money back. And that is not the case. Increasingly, when a bank asks you to do a transaction, you get all these checklists. Do you know this person? Is it an invoice? Is this somebody you've met online? And you tick all these boxes. It's not affordable for banks to be able to give the money back. And another point is what we're seeing, and again, this is in frontline police reporting, and it's a really interesting phenomenon, and we're about to do a research project into next year. And it's called the convergence of fraud, cyber fraud convergence. What does that mean? We're seeing evidence that people who've been the victim of, say, a romance fraud scam, then become a victim of an investment scam, then become a victim of a scam to actually recover their money. So when law enforcement officers first started talking to me about this, they said it's a coincidence. In my area, there's no such thing as coincidence, there is only actionable intelligence. And we did some desktop research and found evidence of databases of victims being built online. And those databases of, say, victims of romance fraud being sold to organized crime groups that engage in investment fraud, and those databases being sold on. Now, there's nothing new in the universe. Back in the 1920s in America, you had a thing called the sucker list. And the sucker list was a very valuable list that con artists kept. And that was a list of people who were likely to fall for a con, some sort of fraudulent scheme. And they had great value and they were being sold. This is what's happening online. And therefore, if you're the victim of one type of fraud, there's a much higher probability that you may be a victim of another type of fraud and another type of fraud.
They piggyback on each other, basically.
They piggyback on each other. They piggyback because the lists are being sold, but they also piggyback at a psychological level. Why? Because once you're victim of a fraud, you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel remorse. It was a romance scam. How could you have sent all your money? And therefore, you desperately try to get that money back. Yeah. So now you might try investing in an investment offer that's being circulated on social media, and you might do that to psychologically regain self-esteem, to get back the pension that you've lost, your savings that you've lost, so that you're not shamed with your family, and then you fall victim again. And then you might fall victim for another scam that asks you to pay $10,000 or $20,000 to recover all the money you've lost. So you see this vicious cycle of fraud.
Dr. McCarthy.
Shall I jump back and
Please.
take your last question?
Yeah, that's
before I
touch back.
side rail this.
Yeah, I was going to touch on
but in many ways it's linked, because you asked about what is the biggest threat or concern or something to that effect going forward. And I think we can talk about how innovation is changing the face of cybercrime. We can talk about the scale and scope of misinformation, disinformation, so on, all these kind of interesting topics. But I think one of the biggest concerns from our side that we're seeing and we're thinking about is that, when we talk about cybercrime, what we're seeing actually is it is an attack in many ways on our trust, our human trust in systems. And I think that's a major concern going forward. And again, what's detailed in our report extensively is that cyber criminals understand the psychology of the human mind, understand how to manipulate and exploit much better than we do on our own side. So I would say the biggest concern personally going forward is that understanding.
And I want to expand on that just briefly, because the fact that you have an agency, the United Nations, where you are, shows that the concern is now across borders. And presumably the sharing of intelligence, the sharing of experiences can help to build the resilience, I assume.
Definitely. I mean, of course, this goes a theme going back since the opening of yesterday's session in the morning, multilateralism. No one can do it alone. And I know it is in many ways challenging times for multilateralism at the moment, but it is the only way forward. I think putting our heads together and collectively seeing how we can share experiences.
Professor. Yeah, so it is about the trust, building the trust as well then. So Dr. McCarthy's touched on exactly what you were saying. It's the biggest issue is this erosion of trust, or the risk of the erosion of trust moving forward as well. So you've given a couple of examples of how we can stop, think, and then check, which I think is important people take on it, because based on the statistic you said, I looked out and I thought those from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia who are here, based on those statistics, 9 out of 10 of the people here are worried about being scammed. 9 out of 10, that's really quite a lot. And that half, 51%, half have actually been scammed, which is quite, I mean, I'm not going to ask anyone to put their hands up because, as you say, shame is a bit of a factor here, but I'm sure people resonate with what you're saying. So now, in terms of, the way things are progressing, the way things are, the cyber world is becoming so all-pervasive, how can we start to build resilience from people from a young age? Because I know one of your concerns is younger people should start to understand this so it becomes part of their established character.
Yes, absolutely. I think that I'm not so much in favor of building resilience, because resilience is a sort of a white flag of surrender. It's just, you can build resilience when it comes to cybersecurity, which is the machine,
right.
But it's very hard to build resilience to losing your money. If you lose your money, you lose your money.
That's an interesting perspective.
You shouldn't just accept that.
Right.
So what I would say is it's about digital literacy, it's about critical thinking skills, and also cyber fraud isn't just a hack of a machine, it's a hack of the human mind. And cyber criminals are not just lightly deploying AI, they're deploying the sort of agentic AIs that can actually evolve of their own accord, that can profile you, that can move with you, that can track you, that can know your behavioral nuances and your specific vulnerabilities. And I think one of the solutions needs to lie, and the previous panel was talking about innovation. I think one of the biggest opportunities for innovation is the development of personalized agentic AI that can protect individuals from cyber fraud attacks. And they need to be age specific. There is a myth that young people are brilliant in terms of their technical skills, but young people aged 18 to 25 are one of the highest risk groups of cyber fraud, not because they don't have good tech skills, but because they're careless with their data.
Right.
Seniors are also a risk group, not because they're careless with their data, but they don't have the tech skills.
So what you're saying is we essentially may or could end up, or should end up with an AI angel on our shoulder, looking over us all the time?
Yes,
Amazing.
customized.
Dr. McCarthy, one of the key things, of course, is that something Professor Aiken referred to early on was the way the public feels that the police should be there to help, authorities should be there to help. You're working obviously at a global level with the United Nations. How do you translate that into community level action and into schools and so on?
Yeah, so the schools is an interesting point because it ties in many ways what was mentioned there. I fully agree, just to say as well on the resilience point. I think it's more, we need to build a culture around it. It's a change of culture, change of mindset is important. And I think that change of mindset starts very, very early on in the school system. You know, we have already in schooling systems, we have very established approaches to civic education, health, forgot the word, health and education, physical education. These are systems, these are processes that are built into the schooling system from an early age, and they're built on year after year after year. I think traditionally what we've done is when we've done these kind of like cyber hygiene kind of awareness things, they're snapshots, they're one-off kind of training programs. But I think what they need to be done is embedded into the educational system, embedded into the curriculum, and as with civics, as with physical education, built on year after year, and grow with the child as the child grows. And then that's how you foster that culture from an early age.
But there is that challenge that Professor Aiken pointed out, that the younger generation is so much more liberal with their data. I mean, everything is so used to clicking. I mean, I'm very careful, for example, I always have been as a journalist. But I do see more and more now the need to click on links, which, I mean, I try and do my stop, think and check, you know. But the thing is that it's so easy now to do everything online. There's a level of being almost stopped from doing anything if you suddenly think I can't click on anything. And that's why I wonder why it might be a...
And I think that's where an agentic AI that's your buddy is sitting with you, and it might say, hey, just think about that. We've been here before, you lost money. You know, I think that one thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really, really important, because this cyber fraud is a global phenomenon, is the construct of a crime on top of a crime. What we're seeing in the latest Interpol report is people being trafficked into cyber scam centers and forced to work there in terms of targeting people for cyber scams and fraud. And that's really a human rights issue that I think we urgently need to address.
Is that something that's come across your work, your desk, so to speak?
Yeah, definitely. It's all interconnected, all interrelated, definitely, 100%.
I mean, technically, you're dealing with crimes and justice.
Yes.
And I guess the justice part becomes the challenging part, because you're now across a number of jurisdictions in trying to deal with this. What's that?
That's actually a good point. I'm glad you mentioned it, because again, definitely our name, as it suggests, crime and justice, but it also includes the interregional part.
That's right.
And that's really the key. And again, if you go back to, I mean, my organization was born in the 1960s. What was going on in the world in terms of crime in the 1960s, we were just discovering and understanding transnational organized crime. Right. And that's in many ways gave the birth to my organization, looking at those interregional connections. And again, this is something that plays out all across all areas.
And just quickly, is there more collaboration across jurisdictions in order to make sure justice can be implemented? Because one of the things I remember hearing various reports in the media about how when people are trafficked, they're from one country and they're then in another country. Jurisdictions sometimes get complicated because you have to get people back to their original country and so on. Does that create complications?
Of course, and fortunately in this year we have actually had a milestone in terms within the UN system globally also with the adoption of the United Nations Cybercrime Convention, which is a milestone, I think, in terms of facilitating that cross-border cooperation around these issues that are so interconnected.
So let me ask you, just literally, we've got about a minute and a half, but 45 seconds each. What gives you hope that we are on the right track in dealing with this, Professor?
I think the power of AI gives me hope. You know, it's a double-edged sword. It's part of the attack vector, but I see it as part of the solution as well. And I think also, if we're going to tackle these issues, we have to tackle them in a cultural context. I'm from Ireland. You know, hospitality and trust is built into our DNA. It's the same here. And effectively, unfortunately, where there's a high level of cultural trust, then there's a high level of cybercrime. So to maintain our cultural ethos, we've got to figure out how to tackle cyber fraud.
All right, your 45 seconds, Dr.
What keeps me optimistic? I think in many ways that we're having these conversations already. This conversation may not change the world, but the fact that we're having these conversations and we're talking about these issues means that in many ways we're not too late, we're not too far behind. We can turn the tide a little bit.
That's good, yeah, because we are seeing crime and fraud, you know, the cyber fraud becoming more sophisticated. We know now that an email from a Nigerian offering half of $50 million is very unlikely, although there was a meme that went out that said a Nigerian was found dead in Lagos with $50 million under his bed. No one had accepted it. Ladies and gentlemen, please, a big thank you for our panelists for this amazing conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you.